Good afternoon. It's an honor to be here, and I'm very grateful for the invitation. I thought, given my own expertise in analyzing the internal dynamic inside Iran, that I would give you just a brief overview in the short time that we have of where the state and society stand now after the elections. And I'm a bit less optimistic than Mr. Abrams as to the time frame of any sort of collapse of the regime. And I hope that what I'm going to mention to you in the next few minutes will convince you. I think that even though we have seen the opposition movement in a much stronger position today, certainly than it was 10 years ago when the demonstrations occurred in 1999, that the regime has been militarized. And on that point, I'd like to sort of begin my brief remarks. What has happened on the side of the state since the elections and really throughout the electoral process has been a very public display of the power that the Islamic Revolutionary Guards have over the system. Now, their original purpose, and perhaps this sort of often gets lost in the discussion of the Revolutionary Guards, their original purpose, as conceptualized by Ayatollah Khomeini, was to be a popular militia force to monitor the remainder of the Shah's military apparatus. And that was the reason that they were initially established. Then they had a role in the Iraq-Iran war. But when Ayatollah Khamenei, the current supreme leader, when he took power after Khomeini died, he began the slow development of the Revolutionary Guards into an extraordinarily powerful force in Iran today. And today they control not only have a military presence, but they control significant parts of the Iranian economy, and they also are a military presence outside Iran. And as you probably read in the press, they have a great foothold in Iraq in the form of the Quds Force. Now again, this has been something that Khamenei has engineered through his own sort of vision of how the system should function. More importantly, in this last electoral campaign, it was clear that the Revolutionary Guards now have a great role in politics in Iran. Not only did leading generals within the Guards publicly endorse Ahmadinejad, but a particular commander, Mr. Jafari, he even issued a public statement demanding that the Guards take a role in the electoral process. At the time, it was interpreted, as we know now correctly, that this was a nod to basically rig the election in Ahmadinejad's favor, and the Guards were very instrumental in this first round of voting to ensure Ahmadinejad's election. So this is how, at least, the Guards, this is the role that the Guards play now in Iranian society and in their role in the state. Of course, this is a subject of great debate inside Iran. Many conservatives, former Guardsmen themselves, including the mayor of Tehran, for example, are very much against this intrusion of the Guards into nearly every aspect of life in Iran. But unfortunately, they've been overruled. To just sum up this sort of characterization of their role, I will share with you a remark that has often been made by Mohsen Sazegharab. He is a leading Iranian dissident who is now actually in Washington. And he was one of the founders of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. And he says, I don't know of any other organization in any country like the Revolutionary Guards. It's something like the Communist Party, the KGB, a business complex, and a mafia. And I think that this is a very, very correct description of the role and the evolution of the Guards in Iran today. It is clear that their rising power, both economically and politically, will go unchallenged. And I think that if there were any doubt, even after the election, of Khamenei's intentions for the role of the Guards, he made clear 2 weeks ago. He appointed new leaders to head the Guards and the Besieged Militia Force, which is a force you probably read about in the newspapers in the latest demonstrations. They have also acquired enormous power under Khamenei, And their major responsibility, one of their major responsibilities, is to monitor student activism on university campuses. Now, 2 weeks ago, Khamenei appointed some of the most notorious leaders in Iran, came from the intelligence community to lead the guards and the besieged force. So I think that that's a very clear sign that we will see an increasing militarization of the state and of society. Now, given this militarization, after the elections, where does the opposition movement stand? It's very difficult from the outside to try to assess their strength and to assess how cohesive the movement is at this point. But I will just share with you some of the information that I've been receiving from inside Iran since before the election. The activists inside Iran describe the movement as broad-based. So unlike 1999, when there were demonstrations, that movement was primarily comprised of students. But now, as we understand it, the opposition includes the underclass, it includes conservative Iranians, it includes religious Iranians, and it also includes Iranians who before June 12th actually were supporters of Ahmadinejad and Khamenei. So in this sense, we can see that the opposition movement now is a much different place than it has been historically since the revolution, which of course is very significant. The big handicap, though, of this opposition movement is that it is leaderless. It has no leadership. We often read in the newspaper that the leaders are Mir Hussein Mousavi or former President Khatami. Actually, many Iranians do not look to them as the leadership of this movement. They feel that the movement has surpassed them because they are part of the regime and they are still advocating reform within an Islamic framework, reform within the current system. Whereas the opposition movement believes not necessarily that there should be a revolution, but that the system has to fundamentally reform. So these people that we read about in the newspapers, the opposition movement, for the most part, does not consider them their leaders. The opposition movement has also become highly radicalized since before the election. And I want to just share with you some slogans. I made a chronology of how the slogans evolved from right before the election to September, to Al-Quds Day, which was also the last demonstration that we've seen. In the short days after the election, the demonstrators were shouting, "Where is my vote? Mousavi, Karoubi, we support you. Coup government resign." So this was an expression of the fact that they felt their vote had been stolen from them. Week 2, the slogans changed. The Iranians in the streets are shouting, "Death to the dictator. I will kill he who kills my brother. The government cheats, the leader supports it." So you can see that the grievance shifted from a protest against a rigged election to now directly aiming their grievances at Khamenei, which in Iran is completely unprecedented. I think now when we hear that there's an opposition to Khamenei, there's a questioning of his legitimacy, it seems logical. But in fact, Iranians have crossed a very significant red line by now shouting in public and calling into question in public discourse in Iran not only his legitimacy as a political leader, but even more importantly, his legitimacy as in theological terms, which of course should be sort of the basis of his right to rule. As time went on, they began shouting by the 4th Memorial Day of the young woman who was killed in this bloody street battle that we saw in Neda. They began shouting, "Khamenei is a murderer, his leadership is null and void." So this clearly demonstrates how the movement became radicalized. And the last slogan that I want to share with you, which I think is important particularly to this audience, was on Al-Quds Day, the day that Iranians basically demonstrate against Israel for the Palestinian cause. The demonstrators were shouting, "Neither Gaza nor Lebanon, my life is only for Iran." So they were decrying Iran's continued support for Hamas and Hezbollah. Again, this is a completely different direction that the opposition movement is taking. Now, I want to just conclude this particular thought with one caveat, which is that the demonstrators in the beginning, the millions of Iranians shouting the slogans in the beginning, which expressed their grievance about the election, are different from the demonstrators who demonstrated in September on Quds Day, because those demonstrators now are pretty hardcore. Anyone now going out into the streets of Iran to demonstrate are pretty fearless, and this is a much smaller minority of people than the millions who demonstrated after the elections. I'll just conclude, because I think the time is run out. I'll just conclude with another pillar of the state that I think is also completely fragmented now, and that's the clerics. And we don't really hear that much about the clerics, but during the years that I worked in Iran as a foreign correspondent for The Guardian, I spent a lot of my time in Qom, the religious center, the Shiite center, and interviewed clerics. Some of the clerics that we hear about today who support Ahmadinejad, Mezbah Yazdi, many of the hardline clerics, I spent a lot of time with them to try to understand their views. And I think that what's happened that's very significant is we've seen a split within the clerical establishment that always existed but has now become public. And the clerics themselves have issued public statements calling Khamenei's legitimacy into question, basically delivering the message to the Iranian people that the human rights violations that were committed in the aftermath of the elections are un-Islamic, and that this regime is illegitimate, irrespective of the results of the election, but that the regime is illegitimate because it is not practicing Islam in a way that's understood by the Iranian population. And to me, this is an extraordinarily important development, because this is basically evidence that Khamenei and Ahmadinejad are not fit to rule. And I think that of all the sort of challenges that the state faces at this point in time, that this is sort of their greatest challenge. Thank you.